Okay, today we'll start consumers equilibrium. So in the last class, we have seen consumers preference or indifference curve. And in the previous class, we have seen the consumer's budget line. So now today we'll see how much amount of the two commodities a consumer will consume. So for example, if this is a budget line AB, and we have two commodities X1 and X2. And if we have indifference curves like this is IC1, and say this is IC2, and say this is IC3. So where the consumer will consume. The purpose of this analysis is how much amount of X1 and X2 a consumer will consume in equilibrium. So all these 3 points, say point C, point D, point E, all are on the budget line AB. So consumer can purchase either at point C or at point D or at point E. Now, where the consumer will be purchasing at which point? So call this point E, and this point D. So can anyone tell me? So here at point E, the budget line AB is tangent to the indifference curve IC2. So consumer will consume, the equilibrium point will be at point E, where slope of indifference curve will be equal to slope of the budget line Now, what is the slope of IC? mu1 by mu2, which will be equal to slope of the budget line, that is equal to P1 by P2. Fine. So this condition is our equilibrium condition, or this is also called as necessary condition of equilibrium. So what we can see that the consumer will purchase at point E, where he will be purchasing, say, OX, this distance, OX amount of X1, and this distance, say, OY amount of commodity 2. Is this clear? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So,
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So,
is it clear to you that the equilibrium point will be at this point, point E, where the slope of IC is equal to the slope of budget line. So the equilibrium condition will be, or the necessary condition will be, the ratio of marginal utilities equal to the ratio of prices of two commodities. Fine. Now,
yes, sir.
why the consumer will not purchase at point C or at point D? Because the amount of expenditure the consumer is incurring consuming this point C, of the commodity combination at point C, and point E and point D are all same. everywhere we need to spend m amount of money income, because all these 3 points are on the same budget line. So compared to C, the consumer can improve his utility by consuming at point E, because he can move to a higher indifference curve IC2 compared to the IC1, the lower indifference curve, even if he need to spend the same amount of income. মানে একই টাকা স্পেন্ড করে আমি হায়ার লেভেল অফ ইউটিলিটি গেইন করতে পারি at point E তে compared to point C or point D. So a rational consumer will consume at point E, which is where the indifference curve is, the budget line is tangent to the indifference curve. Fine. Everyone quiet. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes and no sir ছাড়া কিছু বলতে পারো না? পরিষ্কার হয়েছে এটা? হয়ে যাচ্ছে?
হ্যাঁ স্যার, বুঝতে পারছি স্যার।
সেটা একটু সারা দাও, না বুঝতে পারছি না, আমি বুঝতে পারছি না, তোমরা বুঝতে পারছো না। What about a point like G? So point G, if the consumer purchases at point G, he can move to even higher indifference curve IC3. So can the consumer can be able to consume at point G?
No,
Why?
out of the budget line.
Exactly. So this is beyond your budget. So your pocket does not permit you to consume at point G. So even if point G gives you a higher level of utility, but you simply cannot consume it. You simply cannot afford it. So this is beyond your budget line AB. So any point outside your budget line is not affordable. So what in this diagram, point E will be the equilibrium point where the budget line is tangent to the indifference curve IC1, and in the equilibrium, consumer is consuming OX1 star amount of commodity 1 and this distance, and OX2 star amount of commodity 2. Fine?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, what does this condition imply, or what is the intuitive interpretation of this condition? Okay, so let us rewrite it. So we can write this 1 by P1 multiplied by mu1 equal to 1 by P2 multiplied by mu2, where this P1 is the price of commodity A1 and mu1 is the marginal utility of commodity 1, and similarly P2 is the price of commodity 2 and mu2 is the marginal utility of commodity 2. Now what this side means, so if I spend rupees P1, how much amount of commodity 1 I can get? Yes, anyone?
MU1,
What is mu1?
marginal utility.
So P টাকা খরচ করলে, I'm saying that how much amount of commodity X1 you will get. I'm asking about the commodity, not about the utility. Let us come back to our original. Say price of chop is say 10 rupees and samosa is say 5 rupees. Now I'm asking you that if you spend rupees 10 on a chop, how many units of chop you can purchase? Hello,
হ্যাঁ স্যার।
কি হবে উত্তর দাও একটু।
স্যার আরেকবার বলবেন, গুলিয়ে গেছে।
কিছুই তো গোলামের মতো কিছু বলিনি এখনো। বলছি চপের দাম যদি 10 টাকা হয়, তাহলে 10 টাকা যদি তুমি চপ কিনতে যাও 10 টাকা নিয়ে, তাহলে কটা চপ তুমি পাবে?
একটা।
একটা স্যার।
तो ये बोलने में इतना टाइम लग जाता है. Similarly, if the commodity one price is P1 or P1 is the price of commodity one, then if you
1/P1.
spend P1 rupees on commodity one, how many units of commodity one you will get?
1.
So you will get 1 unit of X1, তাই তো? As P1 যদি
Yes, sir.
commodity one এর দাম হয়, this is P1. So if P1 is the price of commodity one, if you spend P1 rupees of money, you will get 1 unit of commodity one. Fine.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Now, if you spend rupees 1 on commodity one, how many unit of commodity one, commodity X1 you will get? 1 by P1 unit of X1. তাই তো?
Yes,
হ্যাঁ
sir.
স্যার।
Sir.
It's just unitary method. Class 5, 6, 6 শিখেছো তোমরা। Okay. So if I spend rupees 1 on commodity one, how much amount of commodity one I'll get? I'll get 1 by P1 unit of commodity one. As এখানে যেমন 10 টাকা যদি একটা চপের দাম হয়, তাহলে 1 টাকায় আমি কতটা চপ পাবো? 1 এর 10 ভাগ চপ পাবো, তাই তো?
হ্যাঁ স্যার।
Sir, please
Yes,
repeat
sir.
now.
I'm saying that যদি চপের দাম 10 টাকা হয় এবং চপটাকে ধরা যাক দোকানদার ছিঁড়ে ছিঁড়ে বিক্রি করে, তাহলে চপের দোকানে যদি আমি 1 টাকা দিই, তাহলে একটা চপকে সে 10 ভাগ করে তার 1 ভাগ দেবে। That means 1 by 10th unit of a
Yes, sir.
chop
Yes, sir.
you will get if you give him 1 rupee per chop. ठीक है? Now the question is, if I spend rupees 1 on commodity one, how much amount of utility I will get? তার জন্য আমাকে কি করতে হবে? If I get or if I consume 1 unit of X1, how much utility I'll get? কতটা utility পাবো?
One by mu1.
পড়াশোনা কিছুই করছো না। What is definition of mu1? 1 unit of any commodity তুমি যদি এক্সট্রা কনজাম্পশন করো, যা ইউটিলিটি পাবে সেটাকেই আমরা বলি marginal utility of that commodity. So if I consume 1 unit extra amount of commodity one, how much utility we will get? That is mu1 amount of utility we will get. Fine.
Yes, sir.
Now look here. When you are spending 1 rupees on commodity one, how much amount of commodity one you are getting? 1 by P1 unit of X1. So from 1 unit of consumption of 1 unit of X1, the amount of utility you are getting mu1. So if I consume 1 by P1 unit of commodity one, how much amount of utility I'll get? 1 by P1 multiplied by MU1 বোঝা গেল?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Can say that if I spend 1 rupee on X1, how much additional utility I will get? That is nothing but this term on the left hand side, 1 by P1 multiplied by ME1. Is this clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Similarly, if the consumer wants to spend 1 rupee on commodity 2, what is the additional utility he will get? 1 by P2 multiplied by MU2, the term on the right hand side. So at the point of equilibrium, at point E here, at this point, consumer will be indifferent between spending his extra 1 rupee on commodity 1 or on commodity 2. So he will be indifferent between whether he will spend on commodity 1 or commodity 2. So the utility, if he spends extra 1 rupee on commodity 1, will be exactly same with the additional utility he will get if he spends this extra 1 rupee on commodity 2. So we'll get this equality. So that is why this is the equation of equilibrium, or this is also called as the necessary condition of equilibrium. Fine.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, what will happen if this equality is not there? Then what will happen? Say MU1 by P1 is greater than MU2 by P2. Then what will happen? কি হবে? সবাই একটু মৌনব্রত নিয়ে নিলে ক্লাস কি করে হবে? Obviously, you can see that if the left hand side is higher than the right hand side, that means if the consumer spends extra 1 rupee on commodity 1, the utility he will get from consumption of commodity 1 will be higher than the utility he will get if the consumer spends this extra 1 rupee on commodity 2. বোঝা গেল?
Yes, sir.
কি বুঝেছো
Yes,
বলো?
sir.
কি বুঝলে? বুঝতে পারলে কিন্তু কি বুঝলে সেটা বলতে পারছো না। আমি বললাম যে যদি এই কন্ডিশনটা হোল্ড করে, যদি MU1 by P1 is greater than MU2 by P2, then যদি কনজিউমার এক্সট্রা 1 টাকা পায়, তাহলে কনজিউমার সেই 1 টাকা কমোডিটি 1 এর পেছনে খরচ করলে, মানে কমোডিটি 1 বেশি করে কিনলে তার যে ইউটিলিটি পাবে, সেটা সেই 1 টাকাটা কমোডিটি 2 কিনলে যে ইউটিলিটি পেত তার চেয়ে বেশি হবে। তাহলে একজন রেশনাল কনজিউমার যদি এক্সট্রা 1 টাকা পায়, সে তাহলে কি করবে না, এক্সট্রা 1 টাকাটা কমোডিটি 1 এর জন্য খরচ করবে, তার মানে কি হচ্ছে, he will consume more amount of x1 when the consumer start to increase consuming more amount of x1, marginal utility of x1 will start to fall. আর যখন x1 এর কনজাম্পশনটা বাড়ছে তখন অবভিয়াসলি x2 এর কনজাম্পশনটা ফল করবে, সো মার্জিনাল ইউটিলিটি অফ কমোডিটি 2 উইল স্টার্ট টু রাইজ। সো এটা বাম দিকটা আস্তে আস্তে কমতে থাকবে, ডান দিকটা আস্তে আস্তে বাড়তে থাকবে। সো ইভেন্চুয়ালি at any point, at some point, this equality will be restored. বোঝা গেল? হ্যালো,
হ্যাঁ স্যার।
কি বুঝলেন? কি বুঝতে পারলে সেটা একটু বুঝিয়ে বলো, তাহলে আমিও বুঝি যে তোমরা বুঝতে পেরেছো। যাকে বুঝে লাভ নেই। সো again from this condition, this is the slope of the indifference curve and this is the slope of the budget line. Now take any point here, a point here, slope of IC will be somewhere something like this, so which is flatter than the slope of the budget line. This is the slope of the budget line and this red line is the slope of indifference curve. So what will happen at this point? In this case, slope of IC, which is mu1 by mu2, this will be less than p1 by p2. তাহলে কি হবে?
স্যার একবার রিপিট করবেন?
I'm saying that, so for example, take this point, point F. Now draw a tangent from the IC at point F. So this will be the tangent of the IC. Now we can see that the slope of the IC, which is the tangent of this indifference IC1, is less than the slope of the budget line, which is AB. So AB is, you can see AB is steeper than this straight line. So you can write that the slope of IC is less than the slope of the budget line P1 by P2. So what will happen in this case? So from this you can say that mu1 by mu by P1 is less than, if this is less than mu2 by P2. That means if you spend extra 1 rupee on commodity 1, you will get less utility than if you spend that extra 1 rupee on commodity 2. So a rational consumer will decrease consumption of X1 and increases consumption of X2. সুতরাং the consumer will move in this direction back to point E. সুতরাং X1 এর কনজাম্পশনটা কমবে, X2 এর কনজাম্পশনটা বাড়বে। বোঝা গেল? চুপ করে বসতে থাকো।
না স্যার, বুঝলাম না ঠিক মতন।
আর বুঝে লাভ নেই। So at the equilibrium, the necessary condition will be this mu1 by mu2 is equal to p1 by p2, this condition. And the sufficient condition is that the indifference curve will be convex to origin or diminishing MRS. Convex to origin means the indifference curve will be like this shape. But this will not happen if the indifference curve is not convex to origin. Say if this is your budget line and say indifference curve is concave to origin, then say at this point the consumer can get the highest level of utility. So this will be the equilibrium point. So clearly you can see that the slope of the IC is not equal to the slope of the budget line, but still we have the equilibrium here at point E, but here this slope of the IC is not equal to the slope of the budget line. So the sufficient condition for equilibrium is the budget line. So the indifference curve must be diminishing, must be convex to the origin or diminishing MRS. Now come to some special cases, perfect substitutes. So as I said that in case of perfect substitute, the slope of the indifference curves are like this, straightward, downward sloping straight lines. Now, depending on the slope of the straight line, the equilibrium point can differ. So let me draw first. So this is the budget line, AB, and we are measuring x1 here, x2 here. Now, assume that the indifference curves are flatter than the budget line. So this is IC1. Then at which point the equilibrium will occur? বলো কে বলতে পারবে? Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, sir.
What's your answer? I'm asking you that all of you, at which point the consumer's equilibrium will take place, at which point consumer will optimally purchase. Mute করো। কোথায় হবে? No one. So the black line is your budget line. I mute করো। So the black line is your budget line, as the indifference curves are flatter than the budget line. So compared to this IC0 indifference curve, if the consumer wants to stay at IC0, he will consume at point A. Now, even by spending the same amount of income, consumer can move to IC1 indifference curve and can consume at say some point C. So consumer can increase to a higher level of utility even by spending the same amount of money, because point C is also on the same budget line AB. Now compared to point C, the consumer can move to point D also, because he can move to higher level of utility by spending same amount of money, because point D is also on the same budget line. Now compared to IC2, consumer can also move to point B, and by moving to point B, he can move to higher level of utility or higher level of indifference curve given by IC3. So the consumer can move up to point B. So at the equilibrium, so point B will be the equilibrium point, and at the equilibrium point, consumer consumes nothing of commodity 1 and consumes this OB amount of X2, this amount of X2, and 0 unit of X1. Is this clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Now what will happen if IC is steeper than the budget line? So this is your budget line, AB, and your indifference curves are like this. Then what will be your equilibrium point? So the consumer can move up to this
B will be
point.
the equivalent point.
So point B will be the equilibrium point. So compared to point A,
Yes, sir.
if he moves rightward, he can move to higher and higher level of indifference curve. Whereas by being on the same budget line, he needs to spend the same amount of money. So point B will be the equilibrium where the consumer will consume this OB amount of X1 and 0 unit of X2. Fine.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Now what will happen if the slope of the budget line is equal to the slope of the indifference curve? Say this is the budget line AB, and this is also an indifference curve. The slope of the indifference curve is same. Straight lines. Okay, so indifference curves are like this. So where the consumer will purchase, so this is IC0, and this is IC1, and this is IC2. So where the consumer will purchase,
IC2.
IC2 is not feasible because IC2 lies beyond your budget line AB. So any point on IC2 is just not feasible. You cannot purchase, you cannot afford to buy any point on IC2. So this is
IC1.
if you spend something on IC0, you are lying below the budget line. So some amount of money you are left with. So compared to this indifference curve, you can move to IC1. So as IC1 lies on the same budget line AB, or the consumer can purchase at any point on the budget line. So any point can be the equilibrium point. So equilibrium is indefinite in this case. You can purchase at point A or point B or point C or point D where he wants. Anywhere. Got it?
Anywhere. Okay, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Next is perfect complements. So like this, the budget line coincides with your IC. So any point, these dots, or B, point A, or anywhere in between, anywhere the consumer can consume. Now, what about the perfect complements? So for perfect complements, first you draw a line through origin like this, which is the ratio in which the two commodities are complement to each other. That means if these two commodities are tea and sugar, then in which ratio the two goods are consumed. So if you consume 1 unit of tea with 1 unit of sugar, then this ray through origin will be 45-degree line. Now draw a budget line like this. So this is your budget line AB. Now draw an indifference curve like this. So this is IC0 and this is IC1 and say this is IC2. So now which one will be the equilibrium? So if you consume at this point, you are lying behind your budget line. So you want to increase
Sir, not
your
able
utility
to
by spending more.
understand.
So you want to move any point on this. For that, you need to understand the previous class. So if you are absent in the previous class, you need to check the video on YouTube and then you can understand. So compared to this point, if you move to this point, point E, you can spend all your entire income and you can move to IC1. So compared to point E, you cannot reach any point on IC2 because this is not feasible, because this is beyond your budget line AB. And compared to point like C, you can move to higher level of utility or higher level of indifference stuff by moving from point C to point E. So point E will be the equilibrium point where the consumer will purchase this amount of X1 and this amount of X2, X2 star and X1 star. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Now move on to ICC, income consumption curve. So what is income consumption curve? So income consumption curve. So as I said in the previous class, yesterday's class, what will happen if your money income increases and prices of two commodities remaining unchanged? What will happen to your budget line? So if this is the initial budget line AB, and if your money income increases, prices of two commodities are remaining unchanged, then what will happen to your budget line? We have discussed it in yesterday's class.
Budget line will be moved towards right.
Yes, it will shift rightward. So the new budget line will be,
Parallelly.
yes, somewhere like this. So now draw an indifference curve like this. So we call it IC0. So this point E0 is your equilibrium. If your budget line, if your initial budget is M, now for a new budget, say your money income increases. So your new budget line will be somewhere like this. Call it C, D. So now corresponding to this budget line, draw an indifference curve. So this is the equilibrium point E1, call it IC1. Similarly, if your money income increases again, your budget line will shift to the right like this. Say call it GH. Now again, draw an IC2. So this is your equilibrium E2. Now if you join these points by a curve like this, what we got, we call it ICC or income consumption curve. বোঝা গেল?
Yes, sir.
So we can get ICC if we take different equilibrium points corresponding to different levels of money income of the consumer, given the prices of two commodities remaining unchanged. Then we call this, by joining these equilibrium points, or the locus of these equilibrium points is called ICC. Fine.
Yes, sir.
So ICC is the locus of different equilibrium points for different levels of income, prices remaining unchanged. So if prices of two goods remaining unchanged for different levels of income, if we join different equilibrium points, we get ICC. So it's like this. Okay. So E0, E1, and E2, these points are equilibrium points, these points. Now for an IC, if both the commodities X1 and X2 are normal goods, তাহলে ICC will be upward rising. Now if any of the commodities, mute karo, please mute yourselves. Now if commodity 1 is an inferior good, then how the ICC will look like? What is inferior good? Inferior good কাকে বলে? Those goods, say I'm saying that X1 is an inferior commodity and X2 is a normal commodity. Now say initially your budget line is, this is your budget line AB, and you are consuming, say at some point, so this is your initial indifference curve. So this is your E0, initial equilibrium point. Now draw a vertical line like this, straight line. Inferior commodities are those commodities for which if money income increases, consumption of that commodity will decrease. So if your money income increases, your new budget line will shift to the right like this. Now the new equilibrium will be somewhere to the left of this red straight line. So if this is somewhere here, new equilibrium is somewhere here. So this is 1. So where consumption of X1 is less than consumption of X1 at point E0. So if you join point E0 and point E1, you will get a line or a curve. You will get a curve like this. So it will be a backward bending curve like this. Fine. So backward bending from the X1 axis. Similarly, if X2 is an inferior good and X1 is a normal good, then the ICC will be look like something like this. Backward bending from X2 axis. Clear?
Yes, sir.
So diagrams will be like this. Now Engel curve or Engel curve. So this is what your ICC, we have how an ICC curve can be drawn. Now here in the lower panel, here we are measuring amount of X1, commodity 1, and on the vertical axis we are measuring money income, not commodity 2. Here we are measuring commodity 2. So here we are measuring commodity 2. Here we are measuring money income. Now for this budget line AB, we have some amount of money income. So call this M0 money income. So corresponding to this M money income, the equilibrium was at point E0. So at point E0, the amount of consumption of X1 is X10, this much, this distance. So we are plotting E0 point here, X10 and M0, money income 0. Similarly, for an higher level of income, M1 income, CD is the budget line. So corresponding to the CD budget line, equilibrium is taking place at point E1. So at point E1, your equilibrium consumption will be X11. So if you are plotting here, so you are getting this point E1. So similarly, you will get point E2. So if you join these points, what you are getting is called Engel curve. Clear?
Yes, sir.
So what is the difference between ICC and Engel curve? From ICC curve, we can get basically this point, E0 point or E1 point or any other point on the ICC curve will give you the equilibrium amount of X1 and X2. So from E0 point, you can say that this is the equilibrium amount of X2 and this is the equilibrium amount of X1. Similarly, for this, you can say this is the equilibrium amount of X2 and this is the equilibrium amount of X1. So from ICC, you can get the equilibrium amount of X1 and X2 for different levels of money income given the prices unchanged. Whereas from Engel curve, you can get equilibrium amount of demand for any one commodity here, in this case X1. So you can get equilibrium amount of demand of commodity 1 for different value of your income if prices of two commodities are unchanged. Clear?
Yes, sir.
So again, if the good is a normal good, then Engel curve will be upward sloping. For an inferior good and also for a given good, Engel curve will be backward bending. Next is price consumption curve. So from the last class, what we have seen that if price of a commodity changes, how the budget line will change. So here we are measuring X1 and here we are measuring X2. And say this is your initial budget line AB. And say I'm saying that P1 decreases and P2 unchanged and money income unchanged. So what will happen to your budget line? How the budget line will change? So you haven't read anything. So budget line will change to this, say AC. So it will rotate anti-clockwise around point A if P1 decreases. Then you can purchase more of X1. So for AB budget line, if you have an equilibrium point here, E0, and for AC budget line, if you have an equilibrium point E1, so if you join these 2 points, what we got is called PCC, or price consumption curve. Clear? So here,
Yes, sir.
this is the initial budget line AB, and due to fall in P1 and P2 and money income remaining unchanged, so the new budget line will be AC. And for if the price of good one falls even further, the new budget line becomes AD. So this E0, E1, and E2, these are different points. These are different points. So, or different equilibrium points. So if you join these 3 points, what you got is called PCC, or price consumption curve. For a normal good, price PCC will be upward sloping like this. And if one commodity, say X1, if X1 is a given good and not an inferior good. So if the X1 is given good and X2 is a normal good, if price falls for given goods, we know that the demand for the good will fall. So the PCC curve will be backward bending curve like this. Because if the commodity 1 is a given good, say this is the initial equilibrium, E0. Now draw a vertical straight line like this. Now for a fall in P1, this is your new budget line. Now the new equilibrium point, as the demand, as the price falls, P1 decreases. And if the commodity is a given good, so consumption of X1 will also fall. So the new equilibrium point will be to the left of this straight line, vertical straight line. So it will be somewhere here. So if you join these 2 points, E2 and E1, so your PCC will be backward bending curve like this from the X1 axis. Clear? So it will look like something like this. Now derivation of demand curve from PCC, it's the same thing, just in the previous case. So as we have drawn this PCC curve for different prices of P1, P2 remaining unchanged, money income remaining unchanged. So this is this is your E0, E1, and E2. So if you plot here in this axis, here we are plotting prices, not money income. So here in this diagram, we are plotting commodity 1, or demand of commodity 1 and demand of commodity 2. But here in this diagram, we are plotting price of commodity 1 and demand of commodity 1. So for this point, we have some value, or for this budget line AB, we have some value of P1. So if we take this point value, this price is P10. So at P10, you are consuming X10 amount of X1. So you are getting this point. Now if P1 decreases to P11, so we are moving to AC budget line, and the equilibrium is somewhere here. And so we are getting this point where at P11 price, consumer is demanding X1 1 unit of X1. So if you join these points, or point like this, you are getting demand of commodity 1. So what is the difference between PCC and a demand curve? So from PCC, we can get, so any point on the PCC, any point on this PCC will give you equilibrium demand of commodity 2 and commodity 1, X1, for different levels of price of commodity 1 if price of commodity 2 and money income remaining unchanged. But the demand curve is giving you the equilibrium amount of any of the two commodities. Here it's showing us equilibrium amount of commodity 1 for different values of price of commodity 1 given the price of commodity 2 and money income remaining unchanged. Okay. Now how the demand curve for normal good and inferior good and given good will look like. For a normal good, it will be flatter curve like this, D normal, and for an inferior good, it will be relatively steeper like this, D inferior, and for a given good, the demand curve will look like this positively sloped demand curve like this, D given. Fine?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.